Okay, everyone, and welcome to the Creating Sustainable Programming panel. We're going to look at coaching the coach and ability-friendly football. My name's Radha. I'm Director of Design and Facilitation at Beyond Sport and Think Beyond, and it is a real pleasure to be here. We're going to look at the power that football has to engage and include people with disabilities, as well as the most up-to-date thinking on inclusive sport. And we'll look at some of the practical methodologies and techniques that are being used. We have 4 panelists that will be joining us today. I have 2 of them who are with me now, so let me introduce them to you. We have Sabika Shaban, founder of the Specially Abled Community and an inclusion activist, and Ahmed Habib, who's an accessibility advocate. And I can see Rocco's just joined us there, and he's one of the participants in the Ability-Friendly Program. So when his picture comes on, we'll have a chat to him as well. So let me start with you, Sabika, if I may. Can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to have all ability and unified programming within sport?
Thank you, Radha, very much for that. Well, essentially, what it is that when you have a society that is so diverse, and I mean in every way, whether it's gender or ethnicity or ability, then that necessarily needs to be reflected in all these different spaces, whether we're talking sports or education or any other sort of social space. So when it comes to inclusive sports programming, because we're such a diverse community, I mean, when we talk about in the context of ability diverse, we're talking about physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, sensory, a combination of 2 or more, all of the above. And so when you have this diverse community, you need a diverse set of options as well. And sports plays such an integral role in people's lives. I mean, we know across the board, across the world, sports is a form of dialogue, of connection, and why should it exclude any segment of society? So in that sense, why is it important? It's important for all of these reasons. And it's important as well because these are the ways that athletes who participate in these programs build up their confidence, build up their self-esteem, build connections with their coaches, build connections with mainstream athletes. The benefits are endless, to be very honest.
Fantastic, thank you. And perhaps you can bring that to life for us a little bit and maybe talk about some of, I can hear the benefits, I hear the outcomes. Can we talk a little about some of the ways that sports programs can ensure that they are inclusive?
Well, when it comes to those who are leading these programs, essentially it comes to training. I mean, we've got these incredible people, whether we're talking about just Qatar or outside, who have all of these experiences and expertise to share about how we could make our programs more inclusive. Often we hear about all these episodes where parents are denied access for their children to various sports clubs and programs just because either the leaders of these programs are in a place of ignorance, or it could be simply from a good place that they just don't have the capacity to accommodate. But the conversation doesn't need to end there. That's just when the conversation starts. How do we make these programs more inclusive? And this is where you start in going out and seeking resources in order to make your programs more accessible. But just to add that another layer to that, it's not only the leaders and the coaches that need to undergo training. We can even train our mainstream participants. Imagine a 10-year-old boy in a football club who knows not only how to play football competitively, but also as a recreational sport with a diverse individual, whether it's in that athletic space or if it's in the park or at school. These are really incredible skill sets to develop.
Absolutely, and that's really where we see the transition into how sport is having an impact into daily life. I'm sorry, he seems to have decided he wants to talk to me right now. Apologies. So Ahmed, I could see you nodding along there a little bit. I'm going to come to you now. And just thinking about some of perhaps you could share some of the techniques and methodology that specifically the Ability-Friendly Program has developed that you're aware of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of that program, and I'm a benefactor that I've been swimming with them now for over 5 years. But just to add a little bit to what Sabika was saying before, I dive into the details of the AbilityFriendly program, is that I think sports are really important for people with disabilities because whether you're a participant or whether you're a spectator, I think they force people to reimagine disabled bodies. I think most of the times when people are looking at people with disabilities, they see them within a very specific medical model. They see them as people who are ill, or they see them as people who are in need of constant care, those who are unable to compete. And I think that when we start looking at athletes with disabilities, we're forced to reimagine those humans' bodies. Similarly, for people with disabilities themselves, when they're able to engage in sports activities in accessible spaces, they're able to reimagine their own bodies and really start looking at themselves as not just being people that are defined by their disability. I think that when it comes to the AbilityFriendly program, I think what they've done is extremely important in the sense that they've been able to integrate supported or accessible sport programs within the mainstream. And I think that's so critical and so key. And I think at the same time, they've really been unapologetic in the way that they have celebrated athletes with disabilities. And I think it's something that throughout my experience has been quite revolutionary in terms of the way people perceive disability here and throughout the region. You know, having people with disabilities featured in mainstream media and mainstream communications tools put out by different channels in the country has really been critical to forcing people to look at disability in a different way. So I think it really comes down to, you know, forcing people to move away from a medical model to a social model, to understand that if spaces are accessible, then in fact disability doesn't matter at all.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Rocco, can you hear me, buddy? Brilliant. I'm sad that we can't see you, but we do have a great picture of you. So I want to make sure we get to hear from you as well. So Ahmed has told us that he's been a benefactor of the AbilityFriendly program, and I know that you have as well. So can you tell us a bit about the program and what you might do in a typical session?
In a typical session, we usually start off with a warm-up. Then after the warm-up, we do some main activities. And to finish off, we do penalty kicks. Brilliant.
And tell me a little bit about what you've learned by being part of the program.
I've learned how to control the ball better, and when I'm shooting, to slow down so that I can get a harder kick. And it's really helped me for when I'm controlling my walker for turning.
And do you think that then it's helped you when you're in your walker in everyday life and you're not playing?
Yeah.
Fab. Can you tell me what your favourite bit is about the program, and maybe a little bit about your coach?
Well, my favourite bit, so my coaches are either Jamie or Ryan. Ryan, he's very motivational, and Jamie, he's very good at demonstrating things.
Brilliant. I love that. And do you have a favourite part of the session? Is it the penalty kicks? Is it the warm-up?
Probably the penalty kicks.
Brilliant. Brilliant. I'm going to come back to you with some more questions shortly, Rocco. Thank you for that. So we've brought it to life through the eyes of a young person, and just, you know, as any other young kid talks about sport, this is how I get better at what I do. And I think that's part of the reimagining the conversation. That's what we're talking about, right? Perhaps, Sabika, you know, can you give me a sense of, given the year that we've had, the particular challenges that have come around in terms of ensuring accessibility continues within the COVID-19 challenges? Have you seen any great ways that adaptations have occurred, or any particular challenges that have made it even more difficult?
Well, undeniably, this year has been incredibly unique in the way that we've kind of learned how to navigate this, especially in this sports world where you need that contact and you need that physical space in order to function. So I was incredibly impressed with the Ability Friendly program during the time when COVID hit and we had to suddenly disconnect. But they came back full force, whether it meant video demonstrations, demonstrations through regular video conferencing sessions just like this one, or whether it took them time to set in place the right the right measures for children to come back, for adults to come back, to be able to play safely. And now it's incredible and very relieving for, I think, a lot of participants across the board that it is back on track despite COVID, with safety measures in place in order to make this happen.
And do you think that that's probably a reflection of how unapologetic they've been about it? Because it's always been front and center, the COVID response has meant that it was ready to be front and center as part of that?
Well, if there's one thing I will say about any stakeholder who deals with the disability world, they are resilient like nobody else. And so when situations like these come up, they're just in that can-do attitude and how to make this work. And they're probably back on their feet faster than anyone else.
Brilliant, thank you. Dr. Jazilia, welcome. Ladies and gents, let me introduce you to Dr. Jazilia Neves, HBKU Professor and the Associate Dean for Social Engagement and Access. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Jazilia.
My pleasure to be here.
Perhaps I could ask you a little bit about how the Ability Friendly Program was developed. Can you give us a bit of that context?
Absolutely. I think that we have to think about the future of coaching the coaches in a broad way, and think of the importance of having professionals that are ready to address this amazing experience of working with children with specific needs. We have thought up of a very exciting program where our future coaches, ability-friendly coaches, will learn more about disabilities in the perspective of abilities, and through training, through direct contact with these very talented young people, coming to learn ideal techniques, to teaching them how to enjoy sport, how to play football, how to interact with each other, with society at large. So we are preparing a program that is both online and in situ, allowing future coaches to get a holistic understanding of how to train these new athletes.
Brilliant, thank you. And that really sort of takes on Ahmed's point earlier around taking us, looking at disability through a social lens, not a medical lens. And perhaps, Ahmed, if I could come to you on that. Going forward and thinking about your experience within the Ability Friendly Program, what do you think has changed for you because that societal lens is starting to shift?
Well, I mean, on a pragmatic level, it allows me to access athletic spaces when I wasn't able to before. You know, the Ability Friendly Program has put pressure, to be very frank, on a lot of facilities in the country to become much more accessible, and they facilitated that. So from that point of view, that's of course something that's very tangible. From a perspective of, you know, self-image or viewing my own body, you know, it does allow me to reimagine my body beyond the confines of my wheelchair. You know, being in the water, just from a scientific point of view, allows you to be kind of free of gravity. So that's really beautiful on its own. So that's something that's happened for me as well. But more and more, and you know, on a wider level, just seeing more young people really uptake the program has been really, really beautiful, to use a very accurate word, because I think, knowing the social stigma that surrounds people with disabilities in the region is really important for us to create spaces where people with disabilities feel both safe and inclusive, and in a way that they can have dignified experiences. And I think that it's a stepping stone for a much more comprehensive experience in other parts of their lives. I think having athletic experiences that are dignified really empower younger people in particular to build a lot of tremendous self-confidence. And I think it does reflect on their ability to engage in other social settings and academic ones and ones in employment. And I think that, this experience with sports, or this understanding of sports within the context of wider society, has been implemented across the board with young women, with people of marginalized backgrounds, people of color, understanding the importance of sports and the power of sports to really create a platform for young people to engage with themselves in a different way. And I don't think it should be something that people with disabilities are not allowed to engage in as well.
Absolutely. And I really love the way that you have used the word dignified through all of this, because I think that's crucial. And that very first pragmatic point that you shared about having access to those spaces, some of those things people overlook because we see through our own lenses. So, what you've shared there are some wonderful outcomes, and some individual ones, but some of the broader ones that you've shared in society. And as I think about that, I feel like I want to come back to Dr. Jazilia and talk a little bit about the outcomes of the Ability Friendly Program more broadly. So, are there specific ones you are seeking? And I'd love to hear about any of the measurement that you're doing in that space.
Absolutely. We have a very comprehensive program in place. We've been working very closely with Ryan, with the QF Ability Friendly Program. And our outcomes are mainly, I would say, three in broad lines. On the one hand, we want to come to the end of our program having coaches who have the ability to deal with different types of profiles, namely people with autism, with physical impairment, with vision impairment, with hearing impairment. These different players or athletes will have very specific needs, and coaches need to learn how to cater for those needs. So that's on the one hand, profiling and knowing your athletes really well. A second strand is having coaching techniques and being able to be a reflexive professional who can plan, who can execute during sessions, and then who can self-evaluate and reflect and grow in that process. That we will achieve through a portfolio that will be growing with each coach, and that will be almost like guidelines for future action. The third outcome is broader, is more social, and it has to do with the social engagement with the notion of ability within disability. And I think that will be the strongest output with a huge social impact, because it goes far beyond the actual coaching activity itself.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing with us. And in terms of the Coaching the Coach program that you're developing with QF, when is that looking to be rolled out? And what sort of numbers are we looking at?
We are working very hard to have everything going live in January 2021. The whole program is tiered into phases so that coaches can start focusing on one profile and then move on to the next and next, gaining working through tiers of knowledge. So I would think that come January, we will be ready for our kickoff, and we can expect to have first working with autism, then about a month later or two maximum, we should be moving on to physical disabilities, and then on and on. So expect everything to be up and running within the first 6 months of 2021.
Wow, exciting times, certainly. And I guess one of the most important things that's come through that description that you shared there for me is the important thing that we don't consider people with disabilities as one homogenous group that have one set of needs, in the same way that we shouldn't do that in any aspect of society. Differently abled people, physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, need to be considered as such. And I love the way that you've segmented your program to be specific about that. And Sabika, as an expert in this area as well, I'd love to hear your reflections on that program and anything in particular you'd draw out.
Well, we've been with the program for about 2 years now, since its inception, and it has been an absolutely incredible journey just to see that grow. I think one of the most wonderful things that stands out for me is the element of the coach, because the coach stands as the mentor for the athlete, and you've got this person who is entirely invested in this athlete's success and development, which does a lot for self-esteem and confidence, especially for a person who has to navigate the mainstream world with additional needs. But in that sense, I think it's also often a misconception by the mainstream world that when we tend to accommodate diverse needs, it's a compromise as opposed to an enhancement. And so I think this kind of misconception needs to be reformulated, that we're actually enriching our programs and enriching our society by becoming more inclusive. So where Qatar Foundation has been incredible by having these programs in place, I'm really looking forward to the time that this is more of a norm rather than the exception.
Right, absolutely. And I it springs to mind that some of the work that's been done by Special Olympics in their unified program, where you have two differently abled young people working together to support each other, and actually the impact that that's had on their lives in the bigger picture, as well as just playing together, certainly comes to mind. I'm going to take a pause here for a moment. Rocco, it is great that we've got your video on, buddy. Listen, I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about the answer to this question, all right? So I'm going to tell you the question now, and then you get to think about it, and then I'm going to come back to you. So,
okay.
So number one, I want you to really think about your favourite part of playing football. And number two, I want you to cast your mind to 5 years' time, okay? And what do you want to be doing with football in 5 years' time, okay? So I'll give you some time to think about it, okay? And I'll come back to you. So to everyone that's listening and watching, do you have any questions that you would like to put to our brilliant panel that we have here? If you do, please pop them in the chat box, and we will put them to our panelists. But to the panelists from me, I'd like you all also to sort of cast your mind to 5 years' time. And what do you think might be a significant indicator of progress? I know you've already talked about us, this not being a separate conversation about inclusion and sport just being sport for everyone, but maybe you can just bring that to life with what that might look like in reality. What should I be looking out for in 2025 in November when I'm looking back on the year? What do I want to see that's changed? Sabika, yes.
All right. Well, in 5 years' time, an ideal world will look like a parent who has a child with different needs to be able to find extracurricular activities, whether in the sporting arena or otherwise, and not have to be defensive about their abilities, to be able to be absolutely normal in terms of how smooth it is to get the child into a program. That's one of the ways. Another way would be, for instance, a society which is so exposed to the diversity in our community, that if we were to go to a park or a play area or any of these kind of public spaces, you could see a mainstream child being able to communicate and interact with a child with additional needs without any barriers in place. I think often our encounters with the differently abled world is filled with hesitation. We just don't know how to approach, whether it's a child or an adult. We hesitate, and that comes a lot because of the lack of exposure we have to that kind of community. So I hope that in a couple of years' time, I don't have to kind of separate the mainstream community and the ability diverse community and kind of be able to refer to them as a whole. I think that will be something just really lovely to look forward to.
Brilliant. I'm on board with that for sure. Ahmed, how about you, sir? What would you like to see in 5 years' time? What does that look like? Oh, you're on mute.
All right, here. Can you hear me now?
We've
Perfect.
got you.
Just to, in the lead up to that answer, just to build up on the work, the work that the team is doing with regards to professionalizing coaching. I really think it, has a very important dynamic as well. A lot of the times work that's done with people with disabilities is seen within the sort of charity sector. And for lack of, I understand that charity means a very different thing in the UK, which means nonprofit sector, but I'm speaking about it within the term that it's not a profession that is either widely respected or it's a profession that, is taken seriously. It's sort of seen as someone kind of just doing humanitarian work out of the goodness of their heart. And I think that can be a very problematic approach to it, because what ends up happening is that the level of services that people with disabilities receive are always inevitably going to be of a less quality than those that able-bodied peers receive, particularly when it comes to areas of sport, because, sports and able-bodied people can be a very profitable domain, particularly when we're talking on a competitive level. So I think it's really great that resources are being put into place to ensure that coaches do receive the same level of support that coaches of able-bodied children and young adults or adults in general are receiving. In 5 years' time, I think it's really going to be a true test of the World Cup to see how, this tournament has left a legacy in the region, to start shifting the conversation from looking at people with disabilities as living on the periphery to being people that are involved in society at a more fundamental level. Growing up as a child in Toronto, I used to play street hockey with other able-bodied kids who were playing on rollerblades, and that was such a transformative experience for me, because it really allowed me to feel that I was able not only to just be a part of society, but would be able to compete. I later on went to coach an amateur men's football team, completely all able-bodied players, and I would look at the eyes of other teams that we would be competing against, other coaches that we would be competing against, when I would kind of roll up to the pitch in my electric wheelchair as the coach. And I think, seeing more and more of these disruptive experiences would be something that that I would love to see, both in terms of the way that people perceive people with disabilities, but in terms of the spaces that people with disabilities are occupying, no longer on the periphery and much more within the core. And I think that'll be a true test of mega events like the World Cup, and a true test for programs like the AbilityFriendly Program, which has been remarkable. And if I just want to make sure that if I don't have the time to say this later, is to personally thank all the coaches that work on the front line of this program. The ones that I know are Kathleen and Jojo, and the work that we do in the swimming pool has really been life-changing for me. And every time I see them both, I'm always gushing at at the work that they've done with me, because it really has allowed me, once or twice a week, to really break the chains of the limitations of my body and start to explore different parts of it. And I really think it's been transformative. So that's what I look forward to in the next half decade.
Amazing. And that exudes out of you. And I guess that really highlights that coach-participant relationship that's so crucial to everything. And therefore, of course, it makes total sense that Dr. Jazelia, the Coaching the Coaches program is where your focus has been. I'll come to you now, Dr. Jazelia. 5 years' time, what does that look like for you?
Actually, as I respond to your question, I think I will be responding to two questions that have been written in the chat. I see in 5 years' time, I see this program being spread across the world. The way we are preparing this Coaching the Coach program is to allow anybody anywhere in the world to be part of this program. It's for that reason that we are putting a lot of effort into using online materials, an online platform that is open for engagement anywhere in the world. So I see this almost as we are starting we are getting the ball rolling. It's like a snowball, and I hope that by 2025 we will have thousands of little snowballs growing into bigger snowballs all over the world, helping coaches to become stronger. If coaches are better trained, if they are better equipped, our people's experience will definitely be richer. We will have many more people like Ahmed speaking of how much it means to them to be actively active in a world and active beyond what they thought possible. So definitely it will be amazing then.
2025 sounds amazing. I'm literally ready to go. Okay, Rocco, are you ready? You're gonna pop yourself off mute. Okay, buddy, what do you think?
I'm ready.
Amazing. Favorite thing about it?
It's just a fun sport that makes anyone feel like part of a team.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. And tell me, 5 years' time, what do you want to be doing with football?
Oh, I hope that the sport grows and that there will be professional frame football teams, tournaments, and other things.
Brilliant. Okay, so you guys have got some work to do. Sabika, Dr. Jazilia, we need a frame football professional league and team by 2025. Rocco, I'm going to give you one more question I want you to think about, just in case, all right? And then I'm going to give you some time to think about it. Just if you had any questions you wanted to ask, either the people listening, the speakers that we have here, or if there is anything else you want to share with people, I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about them, any experiences you want to share, and then I'll come back to you to have the last word, all right? So you take a few minutes to think about that, okay? So
Right.
as I think about everything that everyone's talked about, and then I reflect on my experience in Sport for Change, and in life generally, none of it happens without great partnerships, right? We can't do any of this on our own. And I'd just love to hear from each of you who have been influential or key partnerships, or how you've created partnerships to help support the development of this program going forward. Sabika, I'll come to you first.
Sure. So I suppose my role from more of being a parent and a connector. So I have a platform that, especially abled community, it connects a number of parents and any stakeholder actually who's interested in this special world. When it comes to programs like the AbilityFriendly program, I see it as part of my job to make sure that people out there know about it. Oftentimes we have incredible assets, we have incredible programs that exist, and it just slips through the cracks. So I suppose in that sense, I see myself as a person who would be getting that information out to the people who need to know this. But when it also comes to partnerships and making things happen, especially in the context of Qatar, I strongly, strongly believe, like, for a country of this size and has such a high concentration of these incredible people, and it is so easy to make magic happen. And so in that sense, I really, really do believe that whatever dreams we have about inclusion that should roll out in the future, if there is one place that it is possible, it is so possible over here.
Fantastic. It's giving me goosebumps, you sharing it that way. Fantastic. Ahmed.
I mean, partnerships, are sometimes lofty words that are kind of just used to describe, public relations driven initiatives. But I think the real key to partnership is how they're able to bring people together. And, initiatives like Ability Friendly, initiatives like the Accessibility Forum at the Supreme Committee, the people that are organizing the World Cup, the real litmus test for them isn't how many MOUs they're able to sign with other organizations. It's the ability for them to create platforms for people with disabilities that are safe and inclusive to come together and set the agenda themselves for what it is that is important for them. Today, December 3rd, we're celebrating International Day for People with Disabilities, and one of the key mantras behind the United Nations Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities was nothing about us without us. And I think that's really key. So I think any partnerships that are void of people with disabilities are effectively useless. I think people with disabilities really have to be at the forefront of setting the accessibility agenda, whether it's in sports areas or other areas of accessibility. So, partnerships really have to be conscious of that. But just to carry on from what Sabika said, I think that as someone who lives with a disability and works with a disability here in Qatar, there's been a huge transformation in the city's ability to provide accessible spaces, but also in the types of conversations that are happening. And I think that does go down to a lot of effective partnerships between communities and people with disabilities, but also not partnerships that are always cozy and comfortable, but also challenging each other and really calling people out on not being able to provide accessible experiences when they should be. So I do think that we have to make sure that partnership doesn't only sit in that lofty level where two executives sign an agreement, but really does come right down to the benefactors of the programs themselves, which are people with disabilities.
Absolutely. And that thing about people being so important and fundamental to this, and it goes all the way through to the partnership you and Rocco have with your coaches and the way that you talk about them and at every level. And I'm really grateful that you touched on the importance of not seeking that perfect fairy tale partnership and recognizing through the conflict and the differing opinions, that's where the growth and the coming together really happens in the learning. Brilliant. Dr. Jazilia, partnerships.
I need to carry on in the line that Ahmed started talking about partnerships. Partnerships only work when passionate people come together, people who believe in the project that they are working on. Partnerships also only work if they are complementary. If we bring the right people together and we are working with each other using our differences to leverage any project. By bringing in the nothing about us without us, by bringing in those who are the end users and making them the providers, by bringing in families, by bringing in and having more Roccos, just like our Rocco today, expressing themselves and being part of these partnerships, we can only go right. I totally agree it's not about institutions. However, we do need strong, believing institutions behind these projects, because unless we are supported by policies, by companies, by institutions, by those who have the power to decide, partnerships won't arrive at their end aim, which is to create useful and truly successful projects. So people, yes, people who believe in projects and people who are supported by institutions that also believe in these amazing projects.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, Rocco, this is your space and time. If there is anything you'd like to share, any questions or anything you just like to share with people. I'm going to give you a moment.
The first thing I'd like to do is thank the coaches, because this has really had an impact on my life. Before I came to frame football, my life was less active. I wasn't doing the things I'm doing now, and I definitely wasn't as strong. So, as I said, it has had a big impact on my life.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rocco. Thank you for sharing that. I'm pretty sure there is no need for me to say anything else other than to let us end with Rocco's testimony that this is important. So a huge thank you to all of our panelists, Ahmed, Sabika, Dr. Cecilia, and of course, Rocco. Thank you for sharing your experience, your passion, for highlighting the progressive approach that's being taken and how holistic it is across society, institutions, individuals, mainstream that we used to call mainstream, that now we really need to not call mainstream, taking out that medical frame and looking at it through a societal lens as a bunch of differently abled people coming together to do things they didn't think they could, and how sport can play a role in that. So it's been a real pleasure to share some time with you today. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the sessions. So for those of you listening, watching, please drop a note of congratulations and thank you to our panelists in the chat box, and I will wish you all a lovely, lovely day. Thank you so much for joining us.